G'day everyone, it's governance update time for the 4th of June 2021 and Stephen Cooper, I'm sensing a bit of excitement from you this week. Hello.
Well, you're right, Chris, because this is something a bit different this week. We must have done 50. We must have done 50 or more of these, and I think the ethos of this show is that we just come together in a fairly random, unprepared way and talk about a few topics. But this week, we've actually prepared.
I'm offended. Random, unprepared? My goodness.
I would have thought, no, Chris, yours is about the years of preparation that you bring to the table every week.
Oh, thank you. That's very, very kind. It still doesn't let you off the hook. Anyway, we do have a bit of news, and then we have something a little bit special, as Steve has alluded to. Firstly, Steve, we've been keeping an eye on what's happening in Dubbo, and I do think we need to talk about what's happened this past week at Dubbo Regional Council, where the mayor has resigned after coming under all sorts of pressure, it's fair to say, from fellow councillors, and as you know, was recently on a longish term, I think 6 weeks, medical leave. As a result of that, and the mayor has been quoted as saying it was the conditions being imposed upon him in the mayoral role by the council that made it impossible for him to continue. The local government minister has now had something to say about this. Have you had a look at her, I guess, advance notice that she's intending to issue a provisional improvement order on the council?
Yeah, and there must be some nuance in the New South Wales Act, Chris, that effectively the minister has issued a show cause, if you like, with about half a dozen points to the council as to why she should not take further action regarding dismissal or so forth.
And we'll put this up on screen at this point, thanks to JLF there in the studio. So what the proposed PIO is apparently going to say is that each councillor has to enter into a written undertaking to conduct themselves in a manner that doesn't constitute bullying or harassment of council staff, to refrain from any action of reprisal against any council staff member for performing their duties, to refrain from making public allegations of wrongdoing against other council officials, use the proper processes for making allegations of wrongdoing against other council officials, and there's a couple of other things there too. I think that gives you the sense of the tone. And Steve, I'm reminded too that very recently that council resolved to bring in an independent investigator to have a look at previous code of conduct complaints and how they were handled. Do you think this is a response of sorts from the minister to say that's not for you to be doing?
A pretty serious shot across the bow by the minister, because I think there were also comments regarding having faith in the recently departed mayor, and the sort of recurring theme there in the declarations that are sought from the existing council around, one, provide a safe workplace, and B, if you've got a beef, can you deal with it properly rather than go to the media? So there's some sort of really key messages in there, Chris.
And they're all things that you would expect to find in a code of conduct in Victoria, aren't they? Those issues.
Yeah, sadly, somewhat honoured in the breach at times, but yes.
So the other interesting thing about this is the minister has given the council 7 days to respond, to make a submission about her intention to issue that order. It would be really interesting to know if there's anything the council could say that would dissuade the minister from actually putting that order in place next week.
Yes, I'm sure the minister, in making an administrative decision, hasn't prejudged her finding prior to hearing from the council.
Good point. Good point. And of course, she is following the process that's set down in the New South Wales Local Government Act. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Sadly, something out of Dubbo every week to exercise our minds in terms of governance and process.
I think on that point, we sort of forget at times in the cut and thrust of politics that it's the poor ratepayers who are paying the price.
Good point too, as always. Now, back in Victoria, a note came out of local government of Victoria to councils this past week about budgets. It seems that perhaps in the confusion of some of the elements of the 1989 Act still being in place and the new Act in some elements as well, that some councils' budgets weren't strictly compliant in the way they were proposing their differential rates. Is that as you understand it?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. So Local Government Victoria sent out a bulletin to councils, basically reminding them that I think it's Section 94 of the 2020 Act has a requirement that in setting a differential rate, that the objective of the differential rate needs to be included in the budget documentation as well. And I think it's a nice reminder, Chris, that around the notion of differential rates, because whether it's farm rates, commercial rates, industrial rates, whatever the differential happens to be, it's about how the pie is managed, if you like. And if someone is paying a lower rate, then someone else is paying a higher rate. And what I think the Act is basically saying is that if you're going to set a differential rate, Council, can you please explain the basis on which the differential rate is set, so there's an element of fairness around it?
Yes, and we don't know how many councils perhaps have run afoul of that. Certainly the advice was issued, I think, in time for them to fix that before most of them adopted their budgets.
Yeah. I happened to be yarning with Tony Rounich from Hunt and Hunt earlier in the week on this topic, and I know that he and Andrew Gunter have done some work, and they've sent a bulletin round to councils, which is a nice kind of high-level explainer as to where the 2020 Act and the remnants of the 1989 Act mesh in terms of the requirements when setting the budget.
I saw that explainer. I thought that was terrific, and it told me something I hadn't quite put my head to, and that is, when do all of those older legislative elements get phased out and taken over by the new Act? That explainer tells us it's actually not clear what that timeline is going to be yet.
No, they're expecting more legislation at some stage. But you're right on a bigger sense, Chris, that it's a really important reminder to just monitor that transition process, because you can easily be brought undone if you're working from the wrong Act.
So moving on to more of the week's news, and we do like to note comings and goings and swappings of CEOs in the sector in Victoria. And I remind you that I'm keeping a tally on the Local Government News Roundup website of councils that have had a change or will have a change of CEO in this term. So we're up to 17 on that list as of this week, Steve, because while Wyndham is not new to the list because Kelly Grigsby's been gone for a few weeks now, Maribyrnong is, because the CEO of Maribyrnong, Stephen Wall, has been appointed as the new CEO of Wyndham to take over in August.
And Chris, you know Stephen better than I, but one would presume A, he's an experienced CEO, and B, he's well versed in what's going on in the western suburbs. So congratulations to Wyndham and to Stephen on that appointment.
Look, I'm really wrapped with this appointment. I think it's fabulous. Stephen is going to be terrific to pick up the reins that Kelly Grigsby has held for quite some time there. And as you say, very, very well versed in what's happening in the West and the growth challenges and everything else that goes with the role of one of the fastest growing councils, if not the fastest growing in the country.
Well, I think my recollection was that let's get out of COVID, but pre-COVID, that Wyndham was growing at something like 10 to 12,000 people per year, and with an expectation that would continue. So there's some extraordinary challenges, not only at Wyndham, but similarly with all of those growth councils that we sometimes overlook if we're not there. So
what this, of course, means the domino effect. There'll be a vacancy at Maribyrnong. We haven't heard anything yet on acting or recruitment arrangements, but we can expect to hear something on that pretty soon, I'm sure. So as I say, we're up to 17 on the list now in terms of CEO changes in this term of the council.
Right. Now, Chris, you're going to now then move to a segue, presumably, about what we've been talking about.
Well, I thought you might do it, but okay, the pressure's back on me. So given that we've got so many CEOs that are new to their roles and the change happening, we thought we'd spend a bit of time talking about what does it take to make that new relationship between a council and a new CEO successful. So we've come up with our first ever governance update top 10. Feel like we need a fanfare. And we call this 10 factors for success when you have a new CEO.
Yeah, and I think the premise of that discussion, Chris, and beautifully explained, by the way, is that like if you look at the history, the community gets value if your CEO is set up to succeed. that we know that politicising the role, and we'll talk about that a bit later, is a recipe for poorer value for the community. So it's just our list, I suppose.
Yes, and look, we'd be interested to get some feedback on this because we've probably missed things. There's quite a bit of subtlety under these headings that we'll try and tease out a bit. This is as much for the council as it is for the new CEO. I think it's probably worth saying as well. So coming in at number 10, it's work as a team, Stephen.
Well, Chris, and what do we know about organisations generally, not just councils? That tone at the top is so important. And so councils having, being really clear about agreed values and behaviours, not necessarily being best friends, but being able to work together and work through their differences, and demonstrating a commitment to the intent of the organisation is just such a vital first step, because we know that if that's not present, the CEO is starting behind the 8 ball.
Is this where you'd bring in the elements of open communication and no surprises, Steve?
I would have thought so, Chris, and staying out of blame. In fact, a lot of work that we've been doing with Just Issue around using those informal resolution processes that are available in the Code of Conduct to ensure that, in fact, where there are tensions and conflicts, that they're used creatively to build a stronger councillor group. The organisations that don't commit to working as a team, sometimes particularly down the track in a 4-year term, end up somewhat imploding. So really important.
And to bring that lens to the development of the Code of Conduct, which I know councils have already done for this term, but there will be review processes built in as well.
I would have thought really important. The Code of Conduct should be an evolving document that is routinely referred to, and that you don't wait until there's a big problem. It's very important.
Okay, that's number 10, work as a team. Coming in at number 9, and this is with a bullet because it's become more, I think, relevant over time. Make workplace safety a priority.
Oh, Chris, can you feel an Aretha Franklin song coming on?
Well, I would, but we'll get hit by the copyright police.
Oh,
so imagine.
Okay. So we'll just say respect without all the dots all the way through it. So, and you're right, you've touched on the fact there's been reports around inevitably breakdown of governance as an element of bullying and unsafe conduct. There have been issues at particular councils and more generally in the VLGA report about sexual harassment in local government, and about the fact that councillors as councillors have a right to perform the role in an environment that's safe. But that also, the emphasis by the council on safety in the workplace has a washover effect and really affects the way that the organisation operates and sets the tone again for a safe workplace. And we know that organisations that prioritise safely perform better. That's it.
Absolutely. Well said. That's number 9, workplace safety. Number 8, this one's holding firm. It's what we call a standard. Expect frank and fearless advice.
Oh, this one goes back a long way, Chris. You've probably got lots of stories about the importance of frank and fearless advice, and the times when it's really incumbent on a CEO to provide advice that they know a council might not want to hear.
I've often said, Steve, and I do this in some of the training courses we do for people who are new to local government, councils need to get the information they need to receive, not what they want to see and hear.
Chris, I don't know that I could say that better. The community is the poorer if that sort of advice is filtered, and if anything is done. And in fact, we know of situations where it is really ended in tears, where CEOs have been punished for providing advice that CEOs should be providing. And in fact, that's reflected in the Act. It's an amendment that was made 5 or 6 years ago to the Act that requires the CEO to provide advice to the council on its legal obligations that the council should know. And that really sets the tone.
This one's got a strong link to an entry coming up a little later in our top 10. So look out for number 3. But let's go to next on our list at number 7, expect different points of view.
Oh, there's so much to unpack in this one, Chris. I think the overriding element for me on this is that organisations and individuals who don't look widely at the information that they take on board or the stakeholders that they act for are far more at risk of fraudulent conduct. That one of the safety measures, if you like, for an organisation is considering all of the stakeholders. We talked at times about the fact earlier around what are some of the key risks for councils, and I think you and I both agree it'd be interesting to get some feedback on people from people who are listening. That one of the key risks for me is where people expect the council to artificially increase the value of their property. So rezonings, issue of planning permits, change of parking restrictions. There will be people who will approach councillors seeking support for what might at face value appear to be well-founded. At those times more than ever, and it probably comes back to, there's a bit of an overlap with the frank and fearless, it's really important for the council to be ready to take and consider a wide range of advice, because there might be reasons why that's not a good idea.
Yes, it's important to remember, I think, that there are going to be different agendas at play, and you need to be alive to that. I think a couple of things about this one that come to mind for me, Steve. One, particularly for the new CEO, is to remember that the councillors are elected representatives. They have a constituency. They have, they're hearing voices, they're hearing different points of view out there, and it's their job to represent the views of the community and bring that into the mix. And I think that's something we can forget at times.
Oh, absolutely. But the organisation that actively practices managing those creative tensions, engaging with the community in a way where it's not the council doing things for the community, but having the community engage with each other as well in a safe way, building those creative tensions and engagements, again, makes for a better council and a better community.
I'm also reminded of a leadership session that I participated in many years ago, first up in local government almost, where a reasonably new councillor talked about discovering, and I can remember this as clearly as day, I thought everything was black and white until I became a councillor. It was only then that I realised it's all shades of grey.
Absolutely. In fact, there's not much that's black and white, really, Chris.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Unless you're a supporter of one of those football teams. Moving on to number 6 on the hit parade, it's give the CEO the time and space to do the job.
Well, actually, if we're talking about workshops that we're at, I was at one years ago with a group of councillors, and the facilitator asked the councillors the question, what do you want, a chief executive officer or a chief operating officer? And it's a really useful question, because the value that the council gets from the CEO is where the CEO is big picture, great stakeholder relationships, got the space to manage the organisation. And it's a useful question for the councillors is around how much time is the CEO spending attending to just the council and the matters happening in the chamber.
And I'm not sure if there's a rule of thumb there to suggest what that makeup would be. But what I would ask is, if you're spending an inordinate amount of time attending to council law issues, how much time have you got to be driving the delivery of the council plan? And there's a hint on another one of our top 10 items coming up.
Wouldn't have seen that coming. So, yeah, setting clear expectations, which we'll talk about, and allowing the CEO the space to do their job, absolutely critical.
Number 5, and we could have put these in all sorts of different orders, but we've sort of, I think, built them in terms of some sort of priority. At number 5, we've got honour the employment contract. What did you mean about this one, Steve?
Chris, I think it's sometimes there's a bit of a tension in the community, especially where the relationship with the CEO has become a matter for local politics around who runs the organisation. Well, no CEO that I know doesn't think that they're accountable to the council. So there is an employment contract. The CEO is accountable to the council, and the contract and the deliverables of clear KPIs and whatever's agreed in that, and this is a space you play in a lot, is absolutely critical. And that role of the council in managing the CEO contract is absolutely key. but there's some caveats on that. That look, the process needs to be respectful. It needs to be professional and impartial. If the council is unable to show procedural fairness to the CEO, then what message does that send all the way down the organisation? So, most CEOs that I know really appreciate if the council can be absolutely clear on the key priorities. What is the top 10 things that the council wants to achieve in that year? So then the organisation really gets a sense of what the focus for the council is. If that process is random and arbitrary, that's very corrosive in the organisation.
And a good place to start in that is, in setting those KPIs, in managing that performance relationship, make sure they're driven strategically by your strategic objectives.
Oh, there's another pointer, Chris.
Indeed. So that's honour the employment contract, and we might come back to that thought as have hinted. We're up to number 4 on the hit parade. This one is called Be Self-Aware, subtitled Look Outside the Fishbowl.
Interesting, Chris, that some council chambers are a bit of a fishbowl in the way that they're architecturally designed, that, people outside the room can kind of look in at what's happening through a big glass window. But there is an element of the theatre of the chamber, of the drama of the chamber, that can really be quite consuming. And I suppose this is a call both individually for councillors and collectively as a group to reflect. Are we operating effectively? What is our impact on others more broadly, not just on the transaction? Now, one of the ways to do that is to look outside, read reports from the Auditor General, integrity agencies, royal commissions, look at trends internationally. The community expects that one of the roles of the council is to keep up with changing dynamics in society. I think the capacity to think broadly and wisely is, and it's almost, I don't mean to be trite about it, Chris, but that is the wisdom that really can be brought to the chamber, and it won't happen. No one became great by staying inside their own organisation.
Yes, you can fall into the trap of being too insular, and I've seen it many times, Steve, where you're consumed by an issue within a particular council. You go out into the world and you're talking to other people and you're almost shocked that they don't know anything about it and, get this, don't care.
Ooh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm inclined
in perspective is all I'm saying.
I'm reminded of a quote by Andre Agassi towards the end of his tennis career, and you'd be aware of this. I think someone was complaining about money and Andre said, what he needs is a dose of perspective. Yes. And really bringing a dose of perspective to the chamber is a great thing.
Perhaps we should rename number 4, a dose of perspective. But anyway, it's too late. Now, number 3 is the flip side of number 7. Now, for our younger listeners, flip side is a term we used to use back in, the good old days of radio, when you had a, little black single 45, which you'd flip it over and there'd be another song on the other side. Do you remember those, Steve?
Well, Chris, I have 20-something, I'll call them children still, who have gone back to vinyl. So we get that at our place.
It's making a comeback. Yeah. So Absolutely. This is probably a double A side, actually, number 7 and number 3. So number 3 is, I love this. This is probably my favourite. It's policy, not politics. In parentheses, you'd like to say stupid, but no. Policy, not politics.
And a nod to a good friend of both of ours, Helen Morrissey, because that was where I got that. And I know, having done some work at Brimbank, and it's funny how soon we forget that, and anyone wanting to do a bit of research on the topic would do well to go back and look at some of those Ombudsman's reports from Brimbank Council, 2008 or thereabouts. Quite a bit went on, and Helen's mantra as CEO at Brimbank has been policy, not politics. Can we have a culture where the decisions we make are well-founded? But also, I think it's one of the points you'd probably like to expand on, Chris, keep the CEO out of the day-to-day politics, because, again, that's quite damaging.
Yeah, I think it just pays to remember that the councillors are the politicians. The CEO is not a politician, doesn't want to be generally, and shouldn't be. So, allow the CEO to work in the policy space, and the council's role is to really set that policy and manage the politics in their own way.
And surprisingly, Chris, there's a bunch of research that says the best decisions are well-founded in policy, that decisions are made in the heated environment of the chamber tend not to be so sustainable. So
Yes.
it's really a reminder about how decisions should be made.
Indeed. Evidence-based, as a good friend would say. Number 2, we're getting towards the pointy end here. Respect the accountability boundaries.
Oh, that's an interesting one, Chris. I'm always reluctant to alert straight to the act because, then it becomes a compliance issue. But there's a reason why in local government acts for the last 6 or 7 years, there's been a quite clear statement that the role of the councillor does not include the role of the CEO. And that's because it's good management practice that the council sets the policy and direction, as we've just touched on. The CEO implements policy and direction and is held accountable to do that, as we've talked about before. If those boundaries aren't respected, then that erodes the ability of the council to hold the CEO to account in a way that's fair or at arm's length based on fact and data. So that's really important. Another CEO that I've spoken to also talks about, well, what does this mean for councillors? And that at times that's really difficult when the community expect their councillors to be problem solvers. And if a councillor's bailed up publicly, in the supermarket or whatever with someone wanting a problem solved, it can be very tempting to dive into the answer. And it's a rare ability, and many can do it well, for a councillor to listen, to take on board the concern, to pass it on to the administration in accordance with the communication protocol, but to then step back and allow the organisation to deal with the matter.
It's a tough one, particularly for new councillors, Steve. I've seen this many times because the community doesn't understand the system. And that's what makes it really challenging for some councillors, because it's not easy to explain either.
And people are people, we're all human. You get feedback from being transactional. The policy work, as we've touched on before, often that's harder. That's a longer grind, and there is less sort of reward at the time for playing in that space, but the long-term rewards are more important.
So we've got a multi-platinum selling number 1 here coming in at the top of the charts. Steve, I feel it's probably a permanent number 1, and it's, in our language, take the council plan seriously.
Oh, Chris, that's music to my ears, that number 1. Local government is about the delivery of goods and services to community. The place where that absolutely starts is the council plan and the other strategic documents. So if the council is able to create an environment where it takes the development of the plan seriously, and that wherever possible, every transaction after that is tied back to the council plan, then that gives a sense of order to the way the organisation will run. It actually sends a strong signal to the community as to what's important and eliminates or minimises unnecessary noise. It gives the council a better sense of how it should respond to issues in a manner which is in fact safe and productive. So the councils that do this well, the council plan is front and centre of just day-to-day conversations. Chris, what do you think?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. As you said when we were workshopping this, Steve, ultimately it's what the Act says, and it's a hallmark of high-performing councils. They set it, they work to it, they remember what it's there for, they understand how it drives what that council organisation does.
Yeah, and there's nothing. Look, 4 years is a long time to set a plan. We've got those strategic pieces of work that will now go for 10 years. There is an opportunity to tweak council plans every year. And COVID's been a really good example of where council plans have been amended because things change. But fundamentally, paying attention to that plan is just so important to enable a CEO to perform well.
We should do a quick recap. We probably should have done this before we revealed number 1, but JLF, if we're able to put these all up. So at number 10, work as a team. Number 9, workplace safety, make it a priority. At number 8, expect frank and fearless advice. At number 7, expect different points of view. Number 6 is give the CEO the time and space to do the job. At 5, honour the employment contract. At 4, be self-aware and look outside the fishbowl. Policy, not politics, comes in at number 3. At number 2, it's respect accountability boundaries, and the all-important take the council plan seriously tops our chart this week of 10 factors for success when you have a new CEO. That's brilliant, Steve. Well done.
Well, I hope so, Chris. I'll be very interested to see what sort of feedback we get over the next week, and we'll be able to report back one way or the other as to whether us actually preparing for this session is a worthwhile exercise.
And look, there might be more things. I'm sure there probably are. There's lots of things underneath all of those headings. And you made a connection that's really resonated with me, Steve. And I want to send a shout out to Anthony Maxwell, who I haven't seen for a long time, but first introduced me to the work of Patrick Lencioni and his brilliant 5 dysfunctions of the team. And if you think for some reason that there's a theme or a system in the ordering of our top 10 that might go from trust to conflict to commitment to accountability and finishing with inattention to results, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
we did shamelessly kind of steal from Patrick Lencioni there, Chris, but it is a great piece of work and really simple, a simple model that
Isn't that what it's about? Applying a theory, in that sense, applying a theoretical construct to real life examples. And I've got to say, it stands up pretty well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Good on you, Steve. Great to talk. Thank you. Look forward to feedback, comments on YouTube, emails if you've got the email address, or just stand out in your backyard and shout it out. It'll get to us somehow. And we'll see you again for another governance update soon.
Cheers, Chris.
Steve Cooper, Chief of Staff at the VLGA, with us on the governance update from VLGA Connect.